we go. All right. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, thank you for clicking on this video to learn about this topic that I'm going to share with you today. I always open up my webinars by thanking you for investing your time in your professional development. But today I want to thank you extra because it would have been very easy to pass up today's topic, which is shame. Not exactly a super fun topic, right? Shame is such a powerful emotion that it actually causes some level of discomfort in people even to hear the word. I honestly wasn't sure if anyone would show up. So I am truly thrilled that you are here, and I hope that I can do justice to this topic while keeping things relatively light and breezy. I'm not going to focus so much on the extreme examples of shame that you might see in the news, right? My focus today is on the practices that are so common that we normally don't even think twice about them. And I want to be clear that I am not here to judge you. I will be talking about shame in school and the harm that it causes. I will be talking about the emotional power that teachers have over their students. It might bring up some memories for you from your own childhood or your own teaching experiences. I hope that it will prompt you to reflect on your own beliefs and practices, and that can be a little uncomfortable. But I want you to know that whatever you may be doing, whatever you've done in the past, I'm not here to blame or judge. In reflecting about my own practices, I had to face times that I have caused children to feel shame. And I'm going to share a couple of those examples with you today. My goal in doing that is to normalize the vulnerability that it takes to reflect on things like that are kind of hard to think about. And in facing our actions as teachers, for better or worse, that is how we grow. This webinar series has so far focused on quiet and or sensitive children. And as I prepared this webinar, I was planning to continue that focus, but I began to realize that too often shame hurts everyone too much, sensitive or not. So I'll be keeping this one more generally focused, but keep in mind throughout our time together today that shame, almost like every other emotion, is felt more intensely and can be more damaging to students who are highly sensitive. And highly sensitive children was the topic of our previous webinar. That should be available on YouTube, or it will be very soon if you are interested and you weren't able to attend, but if you'd like to learn more. I truly believe that the vast majority of teachers mean absolutely no harm to their students at all. I know every profession has their bad eggs, right? I'm not talking about them. I believe that almost all teachers mean no harm, only good. The majority of shame that happens nowadays is inadvertent. It's unknowingly. We are human. And we will hurt each other, even when we don't mean to. But we can heal and grow and move forward when we're willing to examine our current practices and habits and improve them. I definitely don't want to send anyone into a shame spiral just from talking about shame. My hope is that you will leave this webinar feeling empowered to take your teaching to another level. All right, so let's get into it. If at any point, or if you're watching this on YouTube and you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, or if you have any questions or thoughts that you would like to share with me, I would love to hear from you. So you can email me at trow, TROW, @fullerton.edu. All right, I'm going to start with this is not a direct quote, it's more of a summarized quote from Brene Brown. We can't recognize shame if we're convinced that it doesn't happen in our classroom. We're human, it happens. There is no shame free, but we can create shame resilience. I'm going to talk more about shame resilience later on. So try to kind of remember that for later. And then here's a few more pieces of information from Brene Brown. Those of you, if you're not familiar with Brene Brown, she is an author and a researcher, and she's I own a couple of her books. I just love her. And she's got a really, really popular TED Talk on vulnerability. And then the next one was on shame. And she also had a Netflix show where she really talked about shame a lot. Really interesting stuff. So she says that shame is not always an issue in classrooms because teachers are using it intentionally. It's an issue because learning is vulnerable and classrooms are tender places. According to surveys, most people remember something so shaming from their school experience that it changed how they think of themselves as learners. Now, that was not always necessarily connected to a teacher, right? Shaming also happens from peers, or just because we're showing up at school and we're opening ourselves up, and then sometimes we fail, and that can create an internal sense of shame. And no one person is really, nobody's responsible for that. It just happens, right? But also most people remember a specific teacher who helped them believe in their worth and the value of their contribution. In her statistics, I believe it was 90% of people remembered a specific teacher who really helped them and raised their sense of self-worth. And it was about 80 or 85% of people that remembered a very shaming experience. So almost equal, but even more that remember the positive. So here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to start by defining shame, and then I'll take you through a fun history of shame in schools. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it is kind of a dark topic. And, like I said, I'm going to try to keep it light and breezy. I'm going to take you all the way back to ancient Egypt when these things were just ridiculous. And it's sad, but we can almost look back and laugh, right? And then I'll talk about current practices and better practices. If you have questions at any time, feel free to just unmute and ask. I will try to pause at different times, but I might forget, and I really don't mind if you just speak up and ask a question. Otherwise, please remain muted. Also, if you want to share something, always feel free to do that. I am not going to ask you to recall a time that you felt shame or recall a time that you may have shamed a child. So just know that we're not going to go there. Okay, so don't worry. I will not even be asking you to think about that today. You can just sit back and listen to my sad stories. Just kidding. But I will be sharing, I shared the PowerPoint. I don't have any links today though. Okay. So let's define shame. Shame is as natural as any emotion. Has been, Brene Brown defined it as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Oxford Dictionary definition is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. A researcher, Wormser, in 1987, defined it as a feeling of self-contempt that leaves individuals feeling exposed as defective in the eyes of others. So the common thread here is that shame must have an audience. But sometimes often it's another person or people, but sometimes it's just our own critical inner eye. If we internalize shame and relive it over and over again, we become the audience and we don't actually need anybody around witnessing it. It taps into a very deep, innate, and real fear that we all have of banishment. And if you think about banishment back in the days that we were living closer to the earth, in tribal communities or things like that, then banishment could have meant death. If the tribe left you behind, you were in trouble. So it is a very deep fear. And I'm not saying that, getting frustrated with a student and using a tone of voice is actually going to evoke like that strong of a feeling, but that's the connection. Deep down, that's where it is. Internalized shame becomes part of our identity that we just kind of have to live with. And we develop our sense of self in our early years through interactions with others, and even into adulthood. We still do this. We see ourselves through the lens of others, for better or worse. Now, if you develop a very strong sense of self-worth and self-empowerment and self-acceptance, then you're resilient to this tendency that we have to kind of judge ourselves as others do. But that's a long way off for our kids, for all students, for any children. They're a long way off from there. We want to get them there, though, because that's a good place to be. So most or many psychologists who study shame, many of them agree that there is a level of healthy shame. Okay, humans begin feeling shame by age 2. A feeling of shame in response to even the most gentle of parental reprimands. We have to, right? We've got to keep our kids safe. I'm not ever going to say we can't reprimand children. We have to stop behaviors that are unsafe or unkind. So even the most gentle parental reprimands can invoke a feeling of shame in a child, and that feeling keeps the child safe and helps them develop independence, confidence, and self-control. But notice I said even gentle reprimand. So it's not necessary to actively try and activate a feeling of shame in children. They're going to feel it just through natural progression of their development. So we don't need to try and shame children. Healthy shame also reminds us that we're human and we're supposed to make mistakes. It helps us set limits on our own behavior and use our energy in more constructive ways. It also plays a role in regulating social behavior and strengthening relationships. So it can act as an admittance of wrongdoing and clear the path for forgiveness and acceptance. But shame easily becomes toxic because we have this propensity to relive shame experiences. Relived shame scenes in our mind can repeatedly trigger shame throughout one's whole life. Internalized shame is destructive and leads to long-term feelings of worthlessness. Displaced shame, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is also destructive, but it's more external and it can cause harm to others. And shame encourages hiding. We often feel like we want to hide if we feel shame. So take, for example, back when reading instruction was different, I don't think this would be very common now with RTI, and we're able to catch, the deficits or the problems or what kids are missing and address them very early on with RTI. But before that, kids could kind of go a long time not knowing how to read before being sort of flagged or coming to anybody's attention. Some kids who couldn't read would learn how to pretend to read. They would become actors and they could be very good at it. And I've read examples of, a kid who made it all the way to 8th grade before one of their teachers found them out. So the shame of not being able to do what seems to come so easily to other kids can make a child want to hide that part of themselves. Now, this I find so interesting. Some psychologists argue that shame was at one time in our evolution adaptive and functional in the earlier stages of human evolution, but now we're so emotionally complex and our intelligence is just growing exponentially all the time. So now we have these complexities of intelligence and cognition and emotion. And now shame is no longer an adaptive emotion that serves a positive function, but it is instead a destructive emotion. So some psychologists say, you know, it's still good to a degree, but others say, no, we don't need it anymore. It's like the wisdom teeth of emotions, right? Our wisdom teeth were useful thousands of years ago. Now our jaw shapes are different and our diet is different, but we still have the wisdom teeth and we've got to get them removed, or they make our mouths go all funky, right? And shame, some would say, is kind of like that. We have evolved emotionally so much, but now we still have this really strong shame response that causes more harm than good. So shame versus embarrassment versus guilt. Okay, these three emotions serve the same regulatory functions, but guilt and embarrassment do not destroy self-worth. So just to kind of break it down, because sometimes it's like, well, isn't that just embarrassment, or what's the difference with guilt? So embarrassing would be like, I did something dumb, right? And it's embarrassing. It's like face palm, you know, and then you go home and tell your family about it and hopefully have a good laugh. And remember that we all do embarrassing things sometimes. Guilt is the idea, I did something bad, whereas shame is I am bad. Those are the messages that come along with these emotions. Guilt means our actions did not align with our values. So we hurt someone's feelings, but we don't ever want to hurt that person's feelings. We feel guilty about it. That guilt prompts us to make amends, to apologize, to try not to do that again in the future. But shame can do that as well, or it can do a few other things, which I'll get to. Okay, fun facts about shame. These aren't really fun facts, but again, I'm trying to keep it light, guys. So, all right. So research suggests, you guys, and this just blows my mind, that shame has been linked to anger, hostility, a tendency to blame others, feelings of unworthiness and helplessness, depression, carrying a gun, and violent offending. So does that remind you of anything like, I don't know, our country, like the state of America right now? Maybe we have an issue with shame. Maybe we need to think about that. Psychologists have called shame the swampland of the soul. So that's just another fun fact for you about shame. Okay, so I brushed on this earlier. What people do with shame. Okay, so 3 things, and only one of them is good. So if you think about it, you have a class and, oh gosh, you know, you didn't mean to, but you caused kids to feel bad and some of them felt shame. Maybe some of them, I don't know, hopefully most of them will do the one that ends up positively, but you're always going to have some that go this other route. Okay, so let's talk about it. First is shame acknowledgement. Okay, this is the good one. This is the one that resilient kids are going to experience, but we know not all our kids are resilient. This is the one kids have generally a pretty good supportive home life. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, it's pretty good. And they do all right at school. Again, they don't have to be the top student, but just okay. And they feel pretty good about themselves in general. Shame acknowledgement. First step is you feel the shame and you feel like hiding. Okay. Then these folks are going to take responsibility. After they feel that shame, they feel bad. They want it to go away, because we all do. So they're going to take responsibility, face up to rejection, and make amends. That's shame acknowledgement. This is when shame gets just sort of transmuted, integrated, and you come out whole. Okay, you've survived it and everything's fine. But then there's shame internalization. These could be kids that have very supportive parents, but a low sense of self-worth for whatever reason, or just low self-esteem. for whatever reason. Maybe they have a sibling that's always putting them down. Maybe they don't have the nicest group of friends, or they can't make a lot of friends for whatever reason. Maybe they don't do so well in school and they feel shame about that. Okay, so they're already in sort of a place of emotional weakness. They're going to feel the shame and feel like hiding. Then shift the focus inward. That can turn into some negative self-image. Then later they may relive the shame experience, and that can turn into low self-worth. Okay, we don't want this. I know that none of us want this for our students. So this one concerns me for the individual student, but this last one concerns me for the people that are going to come into contact with this person, and that's shame displacement. These are people or kids who maybe have some problems at home, okay? Maybe not abuse, maybe, but it could just be like they don't have a close relationship with their parents, or their parents are really invalidating and use shame a lot, right? It's not abuse. It's nothing that like is against the law, but it's just kind of a negative environment for them. And maybe they also have problems at school. Okay, so they have had it. They feel too much shame, and the way that they've learned to cope with that is to stop feeling it. They don't do this. Instead, they immediately blame others. But then that shame is still inside of them, and it's unacknowledged. So it's still living inside of them, but it's going to show up as anger. Anger is an emotion that feels more empowering than what some people might consider the weaker emotions, such as fear, sadness, embarrassment, shame, that sort of a thing. So sometimes when somebody's scared or they're sad, they get angry. That's because it feels safer than feeling that other emotion. So they've got unacknowledged shame, but instead they're going to express anger, and they might try to retaliate. And then they've got displaced anger and displaced shame that they're putting on other people so that they can keep it out of themselves. Okay, so we don't want these. We don't want these. All right, so keep these in mind. I'm actually going to come back to this a little bit later. Some common shame triggers encountered in schools. Again, these are not all related to teachers. This is just stuff that happens in school. A child who's struggling in a subject might have a super supportive teacher, but they're still very aware that they're behind their peers, and they might feel shame for that. Skill level competition comes up a lot in PE class. That can create a sense of shame, and then just that sense of self. We kind of develop a sense of self through education, and so that's something that is vulnerable while at school. Okay, all right, let's get into the history, you guys. So in ancient Egypt, here we have this. Oh, my picture's over it, but this is a fellow on a pillory or a stalk, right, where they have to, if you're familiar with this type of thing in history, they would have to stand with their like hands and head in this thing, and the public could shame them. So in ancient Egypt, long before anybody understood anything about child development, and kids are squirrely and they need a break and they need movement, and we need to hold them to realistic expectations, they would spend hours a day learning hieroglyphics. And those who failed to meet the expectations for performance or behavior after several hours were actually put in stocks, and fellow students as well as the public would jeer at them. Another anecdote from history is that schools in early China required poorly performing students to bear a shoulder, so kind of pull their clothes down over their shoulder, so that their misconduct would become publicized and induce a shaming response from others. And then let's talk about the dunce cap. That's sort of the icon of shame, right? Dunce was actually a guy that was very smart, but whatever he was doing didn't really work out, and people thought that he was not smart at all. And so his name became synonymous with stupidity. So at first, before the dunce cap, they would send, back in like the 1700s, they would send kids to a dunce table at some schools. And this was throughout America, and I think, well, England and then America. So they would have, the poor performing students would have to all sit at a table together called the dunce table. So as you can imagine, that's pretty shameful. That would feel very shaming. And then the dunce cap, like you see this poor little guy right here, he had to write on the board, "I will be good," and he's wearing a dunce cap. And look at his physical posture. This is the physical posture of shame. Head posture lowered, shoulders slumped, head down, eyes lowered. So that's what he's feeling right there. This continued until as recent as the 1950s. And then another example of this that continued within recent lifetime anyways, was nose to the blackboard. So I had a college professor actually, and she stuttered. I never knew it because it never came up when she was lecturing, never saw it, but she said that she was a stutterer. And in school, when she was in elementary school, she had a teacher who, when she stuttered, she would draw a circle on the board and make her go and put her nose into that circle and stand there. And so I guess she was trying to shame away the stuttering. And she remembered that. That was an emotional memory for her. And that was, I mean, she's still alive, so that's like people who are alive now. Some of them had that kind of experience in schools. Now down here, this is a field trip in Indiana that local kids take every year to this hundreds, a couple hundreds years old, one-room schoolhouse. And obviously these kids are not feeling shame. If you can see them, they're smiling and kind of having a good time. And this person, the guide, is dressed like a teacher and showing the kids, what discipline looked like back then. So we've got this guy in a dunce cap and this guy doing nose to the blackboard. So throughout history, people started to realize that shaming was considered cruel, and it was actually abolished from American criminology early on in our history, early on. Long before we started to address it in schools. So it was considered cruel, and it was abolished and replaced by imprisonment. And so once, there was imprisonment, then the public stocks, shaming, the pillories, all of that went away. And shaming at home declined considerably in the late 19th century as these authors of household manuals, families would read these household manuals, and these respected authors started to advise strongly against using shame with children because they talked about the degradation that it would cause to a child's temperament and character. So, but blatant shaming in schools, like the dunce cap and nose to the blackboard and things like that, persisted for a long time and increased after schools began to move away from corporal punishment. So they stopped corporal punishment, but they needed something effective to replace it with. Income shaming, or increase the shaming, really, because shaming works. And you see the harm that corporal punishment causes because it's physical, but you don't see the harm that shaming causes because that's inside. And it just kind of looks like, oh, a kid, is ashamed and feels bad, but we don't really realize how bad they might be feeling. And then as mass education caught on to include, mass free public education caught on to include working class and immigrant children, shaming as a disciplinary tool increased even further and often targeted those who were perceived as inferior. There was hygiene shaming around like World War I, that became a thing. And then children who had immigrated here with their families were also more prone to being shamed because of issues that people had with that and how they viewed them. In the 20th century, teacher educators began emphasizing practices that were more positive. Practices to increase student engagement, create interesting and fun learning activities, make learning fun, make kids feel good, increase their self-esteem, build them up, and set students up for success. But they kind of tiptoed around the idea of shaming. And it wasn't until Erik Erikson in the 1950s, he was one of the earliest experts to clearly denounce shame as a disciplinary tool. But even to this day, I don't think it's been denounced enough. People tend to tiptoe around it. Sending a child to the principal's office was one alternative to shame because it privatized punishment. And then in the 1960s, a new focus, especially on children's self-esteem, began to prevail. And then we saw shaming practices further decreased. But shaming persists even today, as so many practices in education are just hard habits to break. As numbers of children increase, along with pressure to increase academic performance. So when positive measures fail, we have these positive measures, but when they fail, sometimes we fall back on quiet forms of shaming. And peer groups, we need to remember, they will eagerly engage in shaming as a means of establishing hierarchies and boundaries. So if a teacher is kind of doing these little shaming things, even without knowing it, the peers are going to pick up on it and support that, which will perpetuate it. So a few contemporary examples of where we still see shaming in schools. Lunch debt shaming. Now, this one's not really connected to teachers so much. It's more of a systems kind of a problem, but you may have seen this in the news because it was coming up a couple of years ago, where there were these common practices of kind of lunch debt that would, and what they would do is it would cause shame for students. You know, they'd have to eat like a separate lunch or some other lunch because they hadn't yet paid their lunch debt, or not even be able to eat. And that would cause a lot of shame. So that came to light in the media, and hopefully that's changing. And then ability grouping. This was popular back in the 80s and 90s, maybe the 70s too, where kids would be put into a low group, high group, low group, medium group, and high group. And it was usually very obvious, which was the low group, which was the high group. This is different from RTI. And the low group would just receive kind of some watered down instruction. Sometimes they didn't have as high quality of materials to use. And anyways, and it would be sort of a life sentence for these kids. If they were in the low group in kindergarten, they generally just stayed there. It wasn't flexible like it is now. And this would, of course, be a shameful experience because it would expose weakness. Exchanging papers for grading. I remember having this all the time. Growing up, we would exchange papers to grade. And let's say it's spelling. Think about the kid who fails their spelling test week after week. And then that's going to inadvertently cause that student to feel shame because it exposes that they're failing all the time. Writing students' names on the board. This was all the time for me growing up, and when I was a teacher as well, I did this. asking, and that, of course, is a public kind of display of who's not meeting expectations. Asking a student to move their desk or sit apart from the group. Sometimes that might even be necessary so that kids can keep learning. But I think we can do it thoughtfully and with kindness, right? And with compassion. We don't have to make it this angry thing. A teacher or a principal who's just hostile, that can make a child feel like, gosh, there must be something wrong with me that this person doesn't like me. Recently in Arizona in 2018, there was a story that underperforming students at a high school were required to carry a red ID card when their peers had a blue one or a white one or something. And that was to identify them as students who were struggling. And that felt very shaming. Parents were very upset, and the school reversed that policy. Giving extra credit for bringing school supplies. This, I think, has so much good intent, right? You need kids to bring their school supplies. So you think, well, I'll encourage them by giving them extra credit. But then the kids who can't help it, that their family can't afford school supplies, they miss out on the extra credit. And then they don't have that academic advantage of the extra credit either. Posting grades publicly, of course, and directing our own frustrations at a single child or at the whole class. Maybe because we need to step aside and take some deep breaths, but instead we're caught up in the moment and we sort of direct our frustrations at everyone. And that can make kids feel really bad. So before I move on, well, actually, let me finish this and then I'm going to share a couple of examples of my own. So the behavior charts is the last one that I'm going to share in terms of just kind of those current practices. I used these. Here's one example. Here's another example. These are for sale at teacher created materials and any teacher supply. You can find these. They're very colorful and cute. I think I used the card system. I didn't use it for long because I taught an SDC class and it just wasn't effective with my students, but I did it because as a new teacher, I didn't know what else to do. So I went around to other classes. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. So you do what other people do. So all of these different examples, sometimes there's the stoplight and you clip up or you clip down. Sometimes you have students do it themselves, go change your card. Sometimes you do it. This one, I think, is especially troublesome because look how fun it is. It sounds so fun. It's kind of I don't know, really messing with students because there's monkeys and it's they're riding on a banana. How fun. But then look, oh, you could be having a super day. You could be making great choices, or you have a warning, no recess. Y'all know I don't like that, or a note or phone call home. And so imagine coming to work and seeing your name up on a bulletin board with a note posted that says unsatisfactory, or maybe it's clipped to a red traffic light with a friendly looking note that says, we want to see you improve. Your shortcomings are broadcast for everyone to see, presumably to, maybe inspire you to do better. But does it work? Do you feel inspired to grow? Or would you be thinking, I need to find a new job? So those are those examples, and I'll share, we've got names on the board as well. Let me share this example. This is from a blogger named Ashley Rives, and she has a blog over at lovelycommotion.com. It's down there, /blog. And this is what she wrote. I thought this was such a good example, so I just wanted to include the whole thing. She said, when I thought back on the classroom management strategies I had used in the past, I really had a sense of remorse because they weren't what's best. Take the clip charts, for example. Honestly, I'm not proud of using clip charts. I'm going to be honest with you. And if you still use one, I get it. I was you, but it just hadn't worked. The kiddos who had to move to red constantly, they didn't change their behavior after being on red day after day. Really, why would they? Why would they even try anymore? Everyone's already seen that they were this red kid, and self-esteem just tanked. Sadly and regrettably, these kiddos were the ones that needed me the most. They were the ones crying out for me to help them. And instead, I used a clip chart and just moved their clip every day and basically knocked down their self-esteem every day. I'm not perfect, and I will admit to you that I definitely have remorse in that area because I did not help those kiddos. So it just reminded me that this is not at all what I want to do going forward. And I like her thought process here because she's allowing herself to feel that remorse. Sometimes that feels like shame, or it just feels bad and we don't want to feel it. But we have to look at what we've done and feel a little bad about it sometimes so that we can recognize, you know what, this does not line up with my values as a teacher. So I'm going to do it differently. And I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of my own. Okay, so let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, let's see. I want to get to a more blank slide or just pause the share. Hold on. Okay, I'll go back to that. All right, you can just look at me for a little while. Okay, so I want to share with you what I thought about. As I was reflecting for this webinar, I was reminded of some things that I've done as a teacher. And so I want to share that with you just because it's okay. I mean, I feel remorse about it as well, but we've all done this. It's very common. So my shaming tendency, and it's never been on purpose, it's been unknowingly, but it's probably always been to give sort of a prolonged verbal reprimand with a sharper tone directed at one person. Now, not too bad, because I've always been very, very nice, very gentle, very patient. But then when my patience runs out, I get kind of irritated, and you can hear it in my tone. It's not, I don't yell, but it's still, when it's directed at one person, it feels bad, especially if it's in front of other people. So again, I don't do it with any intent to harm. My intent is to communicate, to get my point across, or to set a clear boundary. But the length of time, plus the change in my tone, plus directed at one person, it causes discomfort at best and shame at worst. And either way, they probably don't even really hear my message because they're caught up in the emotions that I'm invoking. So let me talk to you about Daniel. And Daniel, I would say, is an example of shame internalization. Okay, think back to that slide that I shared about shame internalization. I'm also going to give you an example of shame displacement. So remember, shame internalization is focus inward and makes a kid feel really bad about themselves, and they might internalize it and relive it, and then it can cause low self-worth. So I think this is an example of that. I don't know for sure, but so Daniel was a first grader. This was 20 years ago, you guys. Daniel was a first grader. Like most first graders, sometimes he had a hard time sitting still. And we were settling in after recess, and I was going to read a book on the carpet like I always did every day after lunch and recess. And he just wasn't sitting down. He was with the group. I think he was kind of probably even engaged and ready to listen to the book, but he was squirrely, right? And I wanted compliance. I wanted him to sit crisscross, hands in lap, eyes on the teacher, just like my poster that I had right behind me of the child sitting, you've all seen these, right? The child sitting crisscross, hands in lap, eyes on teacher. That's what I wanted from all my kids. But Daniel just kept squirreling around, even after several reminders. So I kind of got on him, and I don't remember what I said, but what I remember is his face. I could see the pain that I was causing on his face. His eyes got big, and then his posture kind of lowered, looked defeated. He sat, just kind of looked down, and he sat still, but I doubt he really focused on the book. He quieted down, but our connection was weakened after that. I could feel that. And I didn't know how to really like reflect on that at that time. I didn't even think about apologizing to him. I just thought, well, he needs to learn to sit still. I thought kids get reprimanded at school, and that's just how it is. I thought, I'm going to be sure to write this in as an IEP goal for his next annual. I was the one that needed an IEP goal, though. So Daniel had very sweet parents who very obviously, very openly loved him dearly, cheered him on. So he had that good home environment. He was a very sweet kid, but just didn't really have a lot of friends. And there I was getting on him about sitting perfectly. And so I think psychologically, it makes sense that he would internalize shame. He had that good, strong support system, but had that lower sense of self-esteem from repeated challenges that he had had at school, even before I was his teacher. Now, if I could do it again, I would have listened to that little voice inside of me that said, look at his face, he's hurting. I would have apologized right there in front of all the students, or maybe privately if I thought it was going to embarrass him. But, I would have said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, Daniel, I'm being grouchy. I don't want to make you feel bad. I can tell you want to hear the story, and I'm glad that you're here with us. Or better yet, if I could do it over again, and I didn't know this back when I was a, young 20 something, I would have let go of the idea that kids need to be sitting all the same way. I would have offered my students choices like I see teachers doing now, and I love it. Choices on how to sit without bothering others. That's the main thing. Like, don't disrupt others, but you don't all have to sit the same way because we're not all comfortable sitting the same way. So you can sit crisscross, or you can find a little extra space on the floor and sit with your legs straight out. Or you could lean up against, a table leg if that's what's comfortable for you. Or if you want to be up close to me, you can sit up close to me, but you might need to cross your legs so you can fit. Or you want to bring a chair. Okay, bring a chair. You got to sit behind everybody so you're not blocking anybody, but that's fine. I think I would have established that up front, and then it was a part of the routine, and then kids could sit comfortably, pay attention better because they're comfortable, and it wouldn't have even been an issue. Okay, so that's my first example. My second example is even before Daniel, I taught at a non-public school for kids with emotional and behavioral disorders. So this is going to be an example of shame displacement. And I didn't even think about this until like last week when I was finishing up preparing this webinar, and this memory came to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, I never put shame together with this example. So this is Eric. He was a second grade student in my class at the non-public school. Same type of situation as with Daniel, right? This was apparently my trigger. I don't remember exactly what was happening, but I was getting ready to teach, and they were in desks this time, and Eric just wasn't settling down. I kind of think he was near his desk, standing there, but I wanted him again to like follow this whole idea that I had of sitting and looking at me and being ready to work, and he just wasn't. And I called him out on it, and I talked to him about it in front of the whole class, probably for too long and too firm. And here's what happened next. I saw his face become angry. I saw his posture change to forward, almost like a lunge, and he balled up one fist. And before I knew it, he walked right up to me and punched me right in the face, right here. And it hurt. It hurt. Whew. Now, let me tell you about Eric. Very different life experience than Daniel. Okay, he had a difficult home life. He had witnessed some domestic violence between his parents. He was just with his mom at that time, so things had settled, but that's a lot of damage that had been caused. He did have friends at school, but before coming to the non-public school, he had been removed from the public school due to his behavior, which probably tapped into that fear of banishment and caused a lot of shame. So he had problems at home, problems at school, and presumably that affected his sense of self. Those three things can add up to shame displacement, that third column that I showed you, that can involve avoiding the feeling of shame by feeling anger instead, and then retaliating, in this case, by punching the teacher. If I could do it again, I mean, that's a complex situation. I would have given a simple reminder for whatever it was that I wanted him to do. I could have said like, okay, everybody ready? Adam, are you ready? Eric, you ready? I see Cameron's ready, right? I could have done that. That always works, almost. Oh, thank you, Lisa, for being ready, right? That would almost always get all my kids to shape up. But for whatever reason, I just really honed in on whatever Eric was doing. If he still wasn't ready, maybe I would have said, okay, some of you need a couple more minutes to get ready. That's fine. I'm going to start. And then if he became disruptive, I could have maybe discreetly given him a warning, maybe tried using a little bit of humor to diffuse, or remind students of the rewards that they were all working toward, or enlist the help of one of my aides who were there. I had a high number of aides because of the type of students that were in that class. So I could have reached out for help, right? So I don't know. I could have done things differently, but those are my examples. And my guess is that we all probably have something similar. I think that is fairly common among teachers for us to just get frustrated and kind of start laying into kids. So let me go back now that I've shared with you that example, those examples. So behavior charts, names on the board, going back to that, we have good intentions there. And we do get increased compliance, but at what cost? So the intent is to give students a visual for where their behavior stands in class, hoping that it will enable them to control it. The underlying beliefs, this is what I want you to think about, okay? Because this is where we need to tweak some things. My underlying belief in the examples that I'd shared was that kids should be able to all sit the same way. That was my young, naive, novice teacher belief. Underlying beliefs with behavior charts is that all children can control their behavior, and that controlling their behavior is one of the most important tasks. I mean, can all children control their behavior at all times? What about when they're tired? What about when their friends were like picking on them, or they were arguing with a friend at recess, or their friends all ditched them at recess and they were already feeling that shame? What about when they're hungry or whatever it is, right? Can they really control their behavior? We want them to, but is it reasonable? And should that be the most important? The most important task is that we want kids to learn, and we want them to feel good, right? We want them to feel good because then they're going to learn even more. We do need them to be safe. We need them to not be disruptive, but do we need them to control their behavior quite at the extent that our expectations are at? Does it work? Yeah. Behavior charts and names on the board often work, but at what cost? The cost can be shame. Think about how it feels to see your name day after day moving towards the red, broadcast to your friends and anyone who walks into the classroom. The kids that stay on green all the time, they're not feeling shame, but it's the kids that we're trying to really change that are struggling with it. And we all do it. We all grew up with either blatant or subtle shaming in our home, and we never knew that it was harmful because it was just the norm. We all grew up experiencing or witnessing shame in schools, right? Because it has persisted. It was more blatant probably when we were kids than it is now, thankfully. But it's in us. Because we have it in our background, it is in us. And even when we don't want to cause children to feel shame, we might be doing it without knowing it because we haven't thought about it. We haven't examined that inside of ourselves. We first have to become aware of our beliefs so that we can recognize when it happens, take responsibility, make amends, and choose differently. So let's talk about solutions and alternatives. Remember, Brene Brown said that there really is no shame-free, but there's shame resilience. So they keep that in mind. Let's talk about the beliefs that maybe we need to rethink. Okay, these are the beliefs that can perpetuate shame. He or she should know better by now. That is a belief saying that a child should already understand and be able to perform at their best all the time. But none of us perform at our best all the time. And I make mistakes that I should have known better, even at my job. We all do it. So, should they really know better? You're too old to blank, right? You're too old to be so squirrely or so whatever. You're too old to forget your homework. That is the implication that the child should be past this, but they're still kids. Even when they're teenagers, they've still got some kid inside of them. The brain is not fully developed until age 25. So that is something to remember. They're not really too old until they're like 26, and then you can get on them about things in terms of that. Nice girls or good boys don't blank. This implies that behavior is something that only a bad or a mean child would do. The internalized message is, I did that, so I must not be a nice girl or a good boy. Another belief is you shouldn't be so selfish, or you shouldn't want more. And this is like, even if you don't say these things to kids, which you probably don't, but if you think them, you might still be giving them the message. You shouldn't be so selfish. Here's the thing, desire is natural. We all want good things, right? And we all want more good things. That's natural. So rather than implying if you have a desire, you are bad, we can help kids have limits and be respectful of sharing. And then the last belief I'm going to talk about is that children's behavior is a direct reflection of teacher quality. Yeah, that's a big one that is just really ingrained in so many teachers. If your ego is attached to the child's behavior, it will be hard not to shame them. But that's about you and not about them. So here are some alternative beliefs. Instead of they should know better by now, you can think to yourself, all right, everyone learns at their own pace. I know some adults who still don't know better. Instead of they're too old to blank, you might think, well, they may be sixth graders, but they still have a lot of kid in them. Or they may be seniors, but their brains won't be finished developing until they're 25. Good kids don't blank. We can think good kids don't always make the best choices, right? Instead of, well, good kids don't forget their homework, or good kids don't shout out without raising their hand, we can think, well, good kids, even the best of kids, don't always make the best choices. They shouldn't be so selfish. We can think it's natural to want good things for ourselves and lots of it. And my students' behavior is a direct reflection of me as a teacher. You can replace that with my students' behavior is a reflection of their development and circumstances. And a mantra that you might keep in mind is the greater empathy I have, the less likely I am to create shame. And that is absolutely true. So any questions or anything that you want to share so far? I just want to take a moment and pause because I've been talking for about an hour straight. So any questions or comments at this point?
I thought it was really good. I guess I was just thinking of like, what are the different alternatives? I mean, because I do see a lot of the behavior charts and even like Class Dojo, where you see all the list of students' names and the teachers giving points, and sometimes there's like negative points. Like, how do we avoid all that, I guess?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Class Dojo because I've never had an opportunity to use that. And so I was actually hoping that that might be more of a private thing. So anytime that it can just be, I mean, I think a lot of it really depends on how we approach it. But even behavior charts that are only positive can make the kids feel bad that aren't earning those rewards. So anytime we can make it private, that's a better way to go. If there's any kind of option in the class dojo system to make it private so that only the child sees what they're earning and where they're at, then now we have feedback. Now you have behavioral feedback that is not public. So does anyone know, is there any option for that? Because I have not used it, anything like that. Yeah.
I use Classroom Dojo and it is private. So I just, I have it on my phone and I only have like a couple of negative like behaviors. And if whatever it is, I'll just be like, okay, you're getting a dojo. And they also know that I've talked to them, a dojo is just like a warning. So I just want your parents to be aware of what's happening. There's no punishment or anything like that. It's if it continues, then yes, there's going to be something, but it's just something that, okay, I want your parents to be aware of. So they know that it's not, they're in trouble. I mean, I don't know what, at home or whatever, usually I get, talk to so-and-so, whatever about it. But it's very discreet because you just have it on your phone and you can just kind of tap it. I don't know what it looks like on the other end. If a parent get, how their notifications, because most of the time they don't say anything to me or any, even if it's like a really bad thing. But it is very discreet because you're the only one that has all of the names and whatever you want to call the whatever the negative, negative behaviors. But like a dojo could just be like, oh, you didn't do your homework. I just want to inform the parent that you didn't do it, bring it home tomorrow, or bring it in tomorrow. That's fine. We all forget things. So just to try and have, it's not a negative connotation as long as they know, like, I'm not in trouble because I got it done.
Yeah, that's great. So do you know if there is an option that it's public or it's always private? Did you have to choose that?
No, I know of some teachers, you can, maybe they put it on like their computer and they could, put all of them on there so other people can see. I only use my phone, so it is just me seeing these things. But if you wanted to make it public, I'm sure that they could project whatever is on the, they could put it on their computer screen and project it so that way everybody could see you got the dojo or whatever. And also, I think like with the computer too, like, when you get like a message, a noise. So I know in another classroom, there's a noise involved. That means somebody got like a dojo or something like that.
Yeah. But it would be probably somewhat anonymous, I guess, unless you're sitting right next to that kid. It might just be a reminder like, oh, we got to keep staying focused.
Well, the way that it works is every child is on there.
Okay.
So you go into this specific child and then you can click on whatever dojo, whatever behavior that you want. So if someone is projecting, their screen, everybody saw that, Dr. Rao got the dojo and they're all seeing it. Whereas, if you kind of do it and then you tell the student, okay, well, I want you to be doing your work. This is your warning. If you get, 3 for the week, you don't get your prize or treasure, whatever, something like that.
Yeah, well, I love that. So you just kind of set them up like this is feedback, really. So it's feedback from you to the student and it's just between the two of you. You're doing it on your phone, so that's really discreet. And because they do need feedback. I mean, I'm definitely not suggesting that we just, stop any of that. We still have to do something. So I really like that. Because I used to have kids on individual behavior charts, and that was somewhat private, and that was really helpful because, so many of my kids really needed to learn like the learning to learn behaviors, and that was on their IEP, and we had to address it. But they would have private charts, but they were still on their desk, and I'd still have to walk over to them, perhaps to give them a warning or even give them points or whatever. So I really like that because it's so much more discreet. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions before I move on? All right. Okay, so let's talk about some ways of reducing shame. So like I said, some kids are going to feel some shame because of academic failure, and it might not even have anything to do with you. You might be super positive and supportive with them, but they know, that they're having a hard time. So, and because school is a place for trying new things, facing new challenges, failure is inevitable. We can help cushion the blow of failure by helping children cope with disappointment. And I think growth mindset is so key here to help dissolve those feelings of shame. So if you're not familiar with growth mindset, you can find some ready to go classroom activities, a whole unit on it through Khan Academy. Really, they have videos and activities, really cool. So that would be, I know a lot of teachers do that sometimes at the beginning of the school year, and they might carry it out over a month, a couple times a week, maybe a little homework to teach their parents about growth mindset. So that's a really great discussion to bring into your classroom, because that talks about mistakes and failure and how it's the stepping stones to success. So honest discussions always should emphasize the positive while evaluating areas where additional work is needed. So you can use, conferences, evaluations, immediate feedback to help reduce shame. Just normalize feedback and make it kind of matter of fact. Keep your body still. Remember, and you can even call a student out. Remember, Daniel, keep your body still. We're all keeping our body still. Just quick and move on. If that's not enough, then you've got to maybe take some time to think through how you're going to address it with that student. It's okay to have a day of rough behavior while you then after school decide, okay, what am I going to do here? How can I handle this behavior in a way that's going to change the behavior but preserve their dignity? So I talked about ability grouping, and I think that has really been so well resolved through RTI. But heterogeneous groupings, and we've known this for a long time, those have been found to work well for students in certain topics, like when it comes to science or social studies or character development. Heterogeneous groupings can work very well. Children keep their dignity, they learn from each other while allowed to interact with a diverse group of learners. But in reading, we know that homogeneous grouping, when flexible, when done right, is very effective. Not ability grouping like I talked about we used to do in the 90s, when kids were just put into the low achieving group, and they might have been called the green group, but they knew that the green group was the low achievers, and then they never got out of the green group, and then the instruction was not very high quality in the green group. So we don't do that anymore. Now groups are flexible. Students move in and out of groups as they learn and grow. They're assigned to a certain group because they need the skills that are going to be taught in that group. The quality of instruction and expectations are high for every group. And all students are learning to problem solve and think critically. And that's what I see in schools today. So I don't think this is as much of an issue at all, but it used to be. Classroom management. So classroom management can absolutely be a teacher's most difficult task. We've got to hold students accountable for their actions, but we need to keep the focus on the behavior and not the person. We have to have rules, procedures, and consequences, and we've got to enforce them. But we can avoid those discipline techniques that rely on public announcements or guilt to control student behavior, and instead think about natural consequences and provide students with privacy when you're giving them feedback on their indiscretions. So in whatever way is going to make sense to your students. I know if you have a lot of students in your class, it's going to be hard, but I love that the class dojo, I was hoping that's how it was, how Rachel described it. That sounds like a really great solution to that. So yay for technology. And then, of course, we can't always control the peer teasing and the bullying, but research shows that bullying is reduced when teachers and administrators exercise the following: warmth, positive interest and involvement, firm limits on unacceptable behavior, consistent application of non-punitive sanctions for unacceptable behavior or violation of rules, and positive role modeling by adults who act as authorities. So those are things we want to keep in mind to reduce bullying and reduce peer teasing. But really, what I think is so important is creating those authentic connections with your students. I'm going to open this part up with a quote from Toni Morrison that I just love. She said, "When a kid walks in the room, your child or anybody else's child, does your face light up? Because that's what they're looking for. I want your face to light up when every child walks into your room, and they're going to feel like this person likes me." And that's when you're going to have a little more leeway with the child to give them some of that tough feedback that's hard to hear. When they know that you like them, I want them to not even question it, that you like them. So you can do this by investing as much time as you possibly can connecting with your students. Get to know them through games, through conversations, getting to know you surveys, reading what they write about, and let them get to know you. Share personal stories. Even if sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what you're teaching, find an opportunity to share those stories with them. Share funny stories, share your embarrassing moments, share your failures. Show them that you care by really listening to them and enjoying their spirit. Make them believe that you think they are the best kids, and reward them with encouraging, positive feedback when they get things right. Research shows that when a student feels a good connection to their teacher, they are more likely to feel a connection to the content, to engage more in the content, have better peer connections, and feel connected to the school and feel a sense of school spirit. And that goes from preschool through college. That is consistent in terms of that teacher-student connection. And then finally, well, not finally, but almost finally, prepare to repair. So like I mentioned from Brene Brown, shame-free is not really realistic. It's not a matter of preparing in case you cause shame. It's preparing for when. You're going to do it without meaning to, okay? So come to terms with that, and then be ready to repair when it happens. First, you can establish a culture establish an understanding in your class by telling students up front that they're always allowed to tell you how they feel. They're allowed to tell you if you said or did something that makes them feel bad. You can tell them, I never want to make you feel bad, but there might be a time that I do, and I want to hear about it so I can make it right. Think about how empowering that is. What a relief that's going to be for them to hear that from a teacher. And it's setting such a good example for them to apologize to others when they make somebody feel bad, because it happens. Repairing shame requires vulnerability and courage on your part. You've got to be able to get vulnerable and recognize when you've made a child feel bad, and then the courage to speak up and apologize and make it right. Repairing shame leads to stronger teacher-student connection, modeling ownership, and showing the student that they are worthy of an apology or of a conversation, of a difficult conversation like this, you having the courage to talk to them. So it almost makes me hope that you shame a child a little bit. Not really, but you're going to do it. And so you can turn it into something that actually strengthens your connection with the child instead of weakening your connection with the child. So here's the steps. Number one, you have to pay attention. Remember, I said, I knew somewhere that Daniel was hurting. I knew that because from the look on his face, but I just kept going. You got to pay attention to that little voice. Listen to the student or listen to the parent, but attend to the signs of shame, which is like withdrawal, head down, eyes lowered, looking hurt. If you see that, pay attention. And then you might inquire. Okay, but sometimes people don't want to admit that they feel bad because that makes them feel even worse. They feel weak. So you don't want to push for like, did I make you feel bad? Just be honest with me. You know, you might just inquire, oh gosh, did I make you feel bad with that? I'm so sorry. If they do share their feelings, though, thank them. Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I didn't realize that. And then take responsibility. If you think you hurt a child's feeling or caused shame, apologize. Maybe you could have used a softer tone. Maybe you could have spoke to them privately. Maybe you could have used an alternative to punishment, like teaching the replacement behavior that you want to see. And then make amends. If applicable, tell the child how you'll handle things next time if it comes up. And if necessary, you can also talk about what you would like to see from them. Let's see. I have another example I'm going to share with you. Yeah, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to share with you what I think is a really good example of repairing shame. So this is an example of about a student named Juliana, who was a very sweet, very well-behaved, rule-following 5th grade child. She never got in trouble. She never wanted to get in trouble. She was quiet, generally very shy around adults, but had a couple of good close friends and was well liked by her peers. So one day I got a phone call from Juliana's mom. A little bit of background. And this is an example of somebody else, the vice principal that talked to Juliana in a way that made her feel really bad. So at the school, they had just replaced the field. The kids had to go months staying off the field as they dug it up and replaced it. There were delays and whatnot, so it took months. Finally, the brand new field was in, but the kids had to wait like one more day to let it settle before they could run out on it. So there had been an announcement in the morning saying, everyone, you have to stay off the grass. Don't go on the new grass. You know, you got one more day, stay off the grass. Well, at afternoon recess, Juliana had been admiring the beautiful, fresh new grass all day, and she wanted to know what it felt like. So she walked up to it, and her friends were with her, but they were kind of talking, I think. And she just gently touched it with her hands. It was this pretty fresh new grass. And she just stooped down to gently touch it with her hands. She didn't think that was a problem because she wasn't running out on the grass. She wasn't going on the grass. She was just gently touching it and kind of petting it, right? Well, the vice principal saw it and came over and gave her a long talking to. I wasn't aware of this until her mom called me. And I mean, it went on for several minutes, apparently. Her friends were nearby and witnessed the whole thing. You know, she said things like, did you hear the announcement this morning? Well, what did you hear? So why are you touching the grass? You should know better. You're an older, you know, you're an upper grader. You should be setting an example for everyone. And she just went like on and on. And then she turned to Juliana's friends, who were also fifth graders, and said, you two need to help your friend make better choices. Ooh, so I think that especially bringing her friends into the talking to was probably especially condescending to Juliana. Juliana had never been in trouble. Okay, she, like I said, she was quiet, rule follower, kind of a model student. So when Juliana's mom picked her up, she immediately broke into tears in the car, begged her mom not to make her go to school anymore. She told her what happened. She had a good relationship with her mom. She wasn't afraid of being in trouble with her mom, but she was crushed by this talking to. And she was terrified that I was going to be mad at her, that the vice principal was going to tell me what happened, and that the next day I would give her these consequences. I assured Juliana's mom I was not mad at her. I didn't even know about the incident. There would be no consequences. And to please let her know that I was not mad at her and that, you know, everything was fine. And I told her I would let the vice principal know, you know, what happened and how this made Juliana feel. So the vice principal confirmed, yep. I told her, hey, you know, is this what happened? She goes, yeah, that is exactly what happened. She told me she had lost her patience. It was the end of the day. She had grown tired of keeping all the kids off the grass, you know, so she saw Juliana and she just went over at her and lectured her for too long. And, you know, at the time, she just kind of thought she was doing what she should. But when she heard about how it impacted Juliana, she felt bad. So she used the phone in my classroom. I heard the whole conversation. She called Juliana's mom. She listened to what Juliana's mom had to say. And then she said, yes, that is exactly what happened. I'm sorry. I apologize. I regret that I lost my patience. I didn't, you know, she said, I don't know, Juliana. I realized that I was too harsh. And she said, I'll come and talk to Juliana the next day, which she did. So she came to the classroom. She apologized to Juliana, spent a few minutes just talking to her, trying to connect. And her mom reported to me the next day that Juliana felt much better. She didn't hold a grudge against the vice principal. And so I think this is a good example of inadvertent shame that can be caused, right? She didn't mean to. She was in a place of fatigue and frustration. And also, you know, I thought it was surprising that she goes to tells this upper grader, you know, that her friends need to help her make better choices. I was a little surprised at that, because that's kind of how you talk to like a kindergartner or a first grader. You need to help your friend make better choices, you know. But I thought, gosh, the vice principal, she talks to kids of all ages all day. And as teachers, we talk to like the same age group, and we just get to maintain our approach, right? You walk into a kindergarten class, it's going to sound a lot different teacher talk than in the fifth grade class, right? But she's got to adjust all day. She's going back and forth between different age groups, and she has to constantly adjust, and that's probably hard. So I get it. I get what happened. And then it's also a good example of repairing shame, because she modeled that vulnerability. She took ownership, and she really showed emotional maturity and modeled that to the child. And by doing that, she helped save the child of any grudges or internalized shame or anything like that. Okay. So now let me shift to self-compassion. We need self-compassion to build shame resilience. Because like, once again, we're going to feel shame, right? It's the wisdom teeth of our emotions. We still have it, even though it's a little over the top. So we have to build resilience so that we can still live effectively with that. So here's how to do that. I recommend sharing your own mistakes with students. Get vulnerable and then model self-compassion. So here's an example. Oh, good morning, guys. This morning I woke up feeling extra tired and a little grouchy. I felt really off because I didn't sleep well. I've been trying to exercise every single morning, no matter what, and I feel bad because I didn't exercise this morning. But I forgive myself. It makes sense since I didn't sleep well. Tonight at home, I'm going to have a nice hot bath and try to get a better night's sleep. This doesn't have anything to do with anything, although you might kind of be helping out because you're giving your kids a little warning that you might be grouchy that day. And then they're less likely to take it personally and internalize it, right? But also you're just sharing yourself, and you're sharing that, oh gosh, I didn't meet my goal of exercising every morning, but I'm going to forgive myself. So that is a way to teach resilience and self-compassion. It's just being honest with how you're feeling sometimes and showing that you're going to be gentle with yourself. And then building on that, here are some responses that you might give to kids, right? Let's say a kid leaves their lunch at home. We might think, geez, they should know better. But instead we can say, oh, you left your lunch at home? Oh, I'm sorry. It's hard to remember everything some days. The school can give you a lunch since you forgot it. It happens to a lot of kids. I bet you'll remember next time. Let's say a child's really sad because they failed a test. Oh, you studied for the test, but I bet your nerves got the best of you. Would you like another chance to take it maybe in a quieter space? If that's possible, right? We can't always allow kids to retake tests, but sometimes we can. Or let's say a kid in your class gets a pink slip and they're crying. Okay, it might be tempting to just say, well, you need to know better now. Now, next time you won't run on the blacktop. But instead we can use compassion. We can say, I see, oh, you got a pink slip for running on the blacktop. Oh man, it's hard to remember things sometimes, isn't it? Especially if we're feeling excited or distracted. I'm the same way. The child already got the punishment of the pink slip. We don't have to punish them further, right? We can kind of catch them and be their safe, soft place to land. And that helps them build resilience and helps them know that we're on their side. We're not going to take the pink slip away and rip it up. Oh, let's just forget about this. We're not going to rescue them from the consequence that is set up in the school, but we can show them some compassion. And then that will become their self-talk when we do that enough. Another one more. Hey, you seem really excited today. Wow, I love your happy energy, but the noise you're making is too loud and the rest of the class is having a hard time because of it. I'd like you to bring your volume down because I love having you around. But if you continue to be too noisy, I'll have to ask you to move somewhere else so that other kids can focus. I think that's a good way of handling needing to move a child. Sometimes we have to, right? They've got to quiet down so that everybody can focus. But you can have this kind of quick, private, supportive conversation with them that is non-shaming, but just letting them know, look, I want you to be here because I like having you around, reminding them that we like them. But if you're too noisy, oh man, you're going to have to move over there. Okay, most likely they're going to want to come back. And then, if the conversation doesn't do it for them, then they'll figure out how to get back, hopefully. And of course, I really want you to integrate social emotional learning. Create opportunities within your classroom for social emotional learning activities and discussion times such as morning meetings, circles, check-ins, conferences, quiet time, peer mediation, etc. I love that so many schools are integrating this. I've seen so many trainings offered on this, and I want to take a second to direct your attention over to our YouTube channel, okay? Because we have a ton. So let me just switch over to this. Here we go. Okay, here is our YouTube channel. Let me copy the link and I'll put it in the chat. But if you don't, whoops, hold on. Oh, I lost it. Okay. All right, sorry. If you don't get it from the chat, you can just go to YouTube and search CSUF College of Education. And what will come up first is like the home, and then it shows like no videos available or something like that. But if you go to videos, then you're gonna see, hold on. Okay, so if you search, you're going to go to home. It says this channel doesn't have any content. That's a lie. Go to videos and you're going to see all these videos. Okay, so many. And look at all of these social emotional learning series. These are all free. They're very recent. They're available to anyone. So bookmark this and I'm just going to take a moment and show you some of the other really good ones that we have. This past semester, we did a series on IEPs. And so we've got like successful IEP meetings, writing effective IEP goals, encouraging student participation in IEPs. I love that so much, you guys. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And some of them are specific to special education and some of them are for everyone. So just wanted to share that resource with you. And now I will go back to, hold on, the PowerPoint. Okay. Where is it? Hold on, I'm having some issues here. Here we go. PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. Oh, darn it. Keep saying it's failing. Okay, hold on. While I'm thinking about it, then let me just share that link in the chat and then I'll figure this out. Okay, so there is the link to our YouTube channel. Okay, and then I have to do that and share it again. There we go. All right. So social emotional learning can be very, very helpful. And I want to encourage you to practice self-care. I did a webinar on this that it's on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. But we are more likely to fall back on old patterns or take our frustrations out on others when we need to tend to our basic needs. So be sure that you're taking care of yourself so that that is less likely to happen. All right. So any other, and here's my sources really quick. You can find that on the last slide, but that is it for this. So any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I am going to share a link to the survey. So pretty please, before you leave, please take the survey. This helps us to continue getting funding. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, these are funded by funded through the Center for Creativity and Critical Thinking in the College of Ed and from grants from the Schools First Federal Credit Union. So a big thank you to them. And the link to the survey is there now. This was called Shame in Schools. And I think it might ask you for the date. It is June 21st. And of course, I'm Tiffany Rao. And our next webinar, I will tell you while you are doing that, is, where is it? Have it written down so that I can remember the whole thing. Well, oh, I closed my document, but it is going to be on inspiring quiet leaders. So kind of shifting back to focus on quiet and sensitive students. My final webinar in the series is going to be on inspiring quiet leaders. So specifically things that you can do to help some of your quieter students develop some leadership skills, because quiet and sensitive kiddos can make actually very, very good leaders when they're given the opportunity. All right, so thank you again for joining me. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.